This video is going to address the Hellenistic age, the age following the 5th century, and to a great extent defined by the campaign of Alexander the Great. When we were last talking, we were still in the 5th century BC, and we were discussing uh, 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 the advances that Athens had made in the Acropolis and the sites of Delphi and Delos, etc. But at the end of the 5th century, Athens found itself in a bad war with the city of Sparta to the south here. And on the map, you see Sparta and its allies in blue, Athens and its allies in red, and then the neutral states in orange. This war would come to an end in 404 BC with the defeat of Athens and a great humiliation of Athens. And with that defeat in 404 BC would bring an end to the first experiment with democracy, and not to be repeated until the USA. This was a time of great turmoil for Athens. You're probably familiar with this time if you had to read in Civ the Apology, which is where Socrates defends himself from his prison cell before he is forced to drink hemlock. This happens in many points in history, that when there's a great defeat of a society that really surprises the society, they tend to turn on their scholars and philosophers, and that's what happened to Socrates. But with the end of that war, both Athens and Sparta become quite weak, and a city of Thebes emerges as a powerful city a little bit to the northwest of Athens. But we're going to jump over that period and get straight into the Hellenistic period, which starts in 356 BC, and that's the birth of Alexander the Great. And historians like to end it around 31 BC, which is the Battle of Actium, in which the Roman Empire really establishes itself, as do the emperors in Rome. And I'll come back to that battle later on. These are sort of artificial bookends to this age, because in many ways the Hellenistic age, never ended, for reasons I'll explain in a moment. Now, Alexander the Great and his father Philip II came from Macedon, or Macedonia, up here on the left, or on the top in the north. The father, Philip II, shown here on the left, would have the good fortune of having an enormous gold strike in the region that would give him a profound amount of gold. And with this, he was able to finagle other neighboring provinces or regions to join with him. He would marry in with them. He would fight with them. He would do whatever he could do to unify them, or to bring them under his command. And he would then attempt to unify all of Greece for the first time by marching south. He does so, and he dies about halfway through the campaign. And his young son, Alexander the Great, at the age of 18, seen here on the right in this nice little marble portrait bust of him. It's not really a bust, it's a miniature. In any case, he takes over. Alexander's quite young. His army is much older than he, and he has to establish himself in this army. But he proceeds to be very successful, and he will conquer all the rest of Greece and bring it under his command at a very, very, very young age. It should be pointed out that he would only live to the age of 33, like Jesus Christ, not do as much as Jesus Christ, but do a lot. And that is not only unify all of Greece, but he would conquer the whole of the Persian Empire, and for a brief moment, control all of it. And though, as we'll see, it will break up at his death, he will spread Greek influence throughout the Middle East, into India and over Egypt and make Greek style of living and Greek thought very widespread. And that's why I say in many ways it never ended, because we still have ripple effects of the way that Greeks think. And until this very day, you have to read Greek philosophy. Aristotle is a foundation of much of Western thought. Um, and the great Greek tragedians, the artwork, etc. Back to Aristotle, interestingly enough, when Philip II was still alive, he was so wealthy that he was able to hire Aristotle from Athens to go north to Macedonia to be the private tutor of his son. Now, think about this. Aristotle was known as the smartest man in the world by the Greeks at that time. Macedonia was not considered the hub of the universe by the Greeks. By far, it was not. They considered the Macedonians barely civilized. They weren't barbarians simply because they spoke a dialect of Greek. But it was so much money that Aristotle did it. But imagine this. This would be like having like Stephen J. Hawkins as your private professor, or Jared Diamond, or some real brainiac that was just your own teacher. And consequently, Aristotle would be quite educated, or not Aristotle, I'm sorry, Alexander will be quite well educated when he goes off in his campaigns. And that is another important part of Hellenism, is that what he would learn about the world would dramatically change how we view the world. Remainder of his kingdom, and we'll see that one of his generals, Ptolemy, in the pink here, Ptolemy would get Egypt and establish the Ptolemaic Empire, which is the one I really want you to know, because the last of his descendants will be the very famous Cleopatra. Another of his generals, Seleucus, gets Asia, and then a guy by the name of Antigonus gets most of Greece, but there's parts that break up. In any case, we won't concern ourselves with that. The important part is that he had spread Greek way of thinking throughout this area and conquered an area the size of which had never been conquered before, and brought an end to the Persian Empire that had been strong for a couple hundred years. I'll come back in a little bit and talk about a city up here called Alexandria Ascata, once again in modern day Afghanistan. But first, I'm going to return back to Macedonia and show you some of the royal tombs, or one of the royal tombs, at the tumulus at Vergina. Vergina is in northern Greece and Macedonia, and there in the 50s and 60s were excavated a royal tumulus that has many tombs in it. We see an aerial view here. And here are some shots. That's the tumulus there on the left. Upper right is the entranceway into it. And down here we have an excavation shot for fun. Now, one of the tombs is shaped like this. You have to imagine it's all covered over. On the right-hand side, it's covered over, it's dug into the mound, let's put it that way, or the mound's built over. And we have a interesting Greek facade shown here on the right, and I'll show you in greater detail in a moment. And then two chambers in which grave offerings were left. And it is in the shape of and it uses for the first time we've seen an arch. And a true arch, not a corbelled vault like we had with the Mycenaeans, but a true arch. Now, those of you that have taken me an art history survey, I usually tell you that the Romans were the first ones to invent this. Well, not really. The Romans would certainly take advantage of it more than anybody else. But arches were being used to a certain extent in the Mesopotamia at this time, and we see it being used here. So we see this arched structure, and that's interesting because it's an arched, two rooms with an arched covering, but with a interesting, somewhat atypical Greco-Roman facade. And this is what it looks like. And here we see an example of a of Doric columns, engaged Doric columns, and indeed with the Doric triglyphs above, those blue triglyphs with the intervening metopes, typical of the Doric order. But there's a couple things that are different here. First of all, these Doric pillars are not required for the structure to stand. They are engaged, so that is to say, built into the wall, so they're not structural. They're purely decorative. The pilasters on each side of those, and pilasters are engaged piers. Piers are square, columns round, and when these piers are engaged, like these are, they're pilasters. So that's a little bit different. But in general, with keeping with the Doric order, we have the metopes and triglyphs in the entablature area. But unlike the Doric order, we have this frieze on top that is continuous, and it's a painted frieze. And we can see a close-up of it here. So usually you can see a mixture of Doric and Ionic. The Doric has the metopes and triglyphs, which gives broken images or snapshots of events, and then this painted frieze on the top. And here I show a reconstruction of it, and it's just a hunting scene, but a very well painted hunting scene, showing men on horseback, attack and dogs attacking animals. This is very idealized in many ways. The men on horseback and out hunting are in the nude. They, of course, would not have engaged in such behavior in the nude. But we see that the painters are able to show, once again, the body and the animals, bodies of the humans and the animals in any position they so wish. Notice the lion in the upper left there. Another animal appears to be a lion on the upper right coming out of its den. Below there are some clothed men there. To a little bit closer to the, or ongoing to the left, we see another animal engaged with a man with a cape lunging out with his left leg and a dog attacking. Moving to the left, we see some spearsmen hunting what might be a boar down there. But in any case, it's a very busy, exciting painting of a hunting scene over this tomb. Some people believe it's painted by the name of Philoxenos. You're not required to know that because that's just it's not certain. In any case, once again, you see here on the left a cutaway of these of the tomb itself, as it would have been. It's partially covered over, but it's showing the inside two chambers. And here we see when you have walked into the first chamber, this is what you would see, and you would see a doorway into a second chamber. And there was found a stone box with a solid gold box inside. And remember, the Macedonians had this wonderful gold strike that gave them a lot of wealth. And it has this sunburst on the top. And here is what it looks like when it's taken out of the stone box. Little lapis lazuli rosettes, floral decorations around it, and once again this sunburst lid. And when you open that, what was found was this wreath with literally a laurel wreath made out of gold foil. Once again, gold foil is basically like aluminum foil made out of gold. But look at the delicacy of this work. Let me give you a close-up of it. You can see how finely made the leaves are and the little acorns with the beading or granulation on the top of them and the thin stems of gold. Craftsmanship so fine, it's hard to parallel by artisans today. So that's a lot of wealth being buried in this box. In addition, were found this golden container of quiver, container of arrows, and then on the right, in the center on the right, two greaves. Now remember, greaves are like catchers' shin guards, and they were used in battle to protect your shins. And we can see here on the left that they are not of the same height. And we know from historical sources that Philip II had one leg shorter than the other. And so it's a good guess that this is Philip II's tomb. In addition, we won't go into this, but they've studied a skull found there, and they've noticed that the skull has a nick at the orbital part of the skull. The right hand side of his skull, right near the eye, and we know he took a spear or arrow there in one battle and lost his eyesight. So that's further confirmation. So that's quite interesting. These bronze greaves that are been gilded, that is to say, been covered over with gold. And then there is this quiver that shows, once again, a battle scene on the top. I don't want to go too much into this, but I want to point out that notice the stance of these men with the right leg, or his left leg, but on our right-hand side, like jutting out, and the other leg sticking back like this, and the cape flowing around. And we see this posture a lot in the Macedonian art, and this will also be picked up by the Romans. But I'm not too concerned that you know the quiver, but I am concerned that you know the mosaics. And this is the first time we've talked about mosaics in this class. This is a pebble mosaic. There are two types of mosaic. There are mosaics made out of, like this one, pebbles, which are just colored pebbles found in a riverbed or in a creek or whatever. The more advanced type, which we'll soon see, is the use of tesserae. Tesserae in the singular, tesserae, A-E in the plural. And those are man-made, flattened, square, or rectangular shapes, rather than just natural cobbles, or natural pebbles, rather. And these are placed into a plaster background in order to make this depiction. This is very meticulous work. This one probably has, I don't know, 100,000, 200,000 pebbles put into it. And it shows two men hunting. And notice their stance, as I mentioned in the last class. It is in the last slide, rather, with their legs jutting out. They're not symmetrical, but they parallel the two men, each other. One on the right attacking forward, the man on the left attacking sort of backwards, as if sort of running away, but in the same stances, at least leg and torso wise. Once again, it's doubtful that they would actually hunt a lion in the nude. This is more for the artist to show his skill at mastery of the technique. The man on the left has a little spear that he's about to throw in, or maybe it's a sword. Like he carries his sheath in his left hand. The cape draped over his left arm. He wears a hat that's called a patella. You probably know the word patella because it's that's our knee bone. The knee bone gets its shape from this hat because that's sort of the shape of your kneecap. Notice that his lips are made in red in order for them to jut out. The lion is crouched down, ready to take an attack from both sides. Notice the shading of the pebbles in its body to show its musculature, and then the red stones to show its mane and its tongue and the tip of its tail. And there's a bit of what's called foreshortening, which is an artistic technique which attempts to show depth. And in this case, what it means is that for example, the haunches of the lion, the hips, are smaller in relationship to the rest of the body than they should be, just by a little bit, not by a lot, but just by a little bit, but enough to make them look like they're farther back. And the same with the front being a little bit larger. I've discussed this in class. If the things farther away look smaller, things closer look bigger. So The foreshortening is being used by this artist quite well. And then here we see on the right this man charging forward with his sword about to attack, lunging forward with his right leg. And that lunge is reinforced by his flowing cape. Also, finally, we see that the line is the center of the image. The men on bracketing it, but also we see the not the action happening, but the action about to happen. They are about to slaughter this animal. The comparison I like to talk about is the Air Jordan image. It doesn't show Michael Jordan dunking the ball, but it shows him just before he dunks it. And that's what we're seeing here. Here's another interesting mosaic. Once these two men hunting a stag. Before we get into that, I want to point out that this is our first example of an emblema. An emblema is the pictorial image on a mosaic that is then surrounded by decorative floral designs. It doesn't have to be floral, but some decorative designs. The RISD Museum has some good mosaics that are examples of this. Yeah, and on the top here we see little waves and then tendrils below it. That on the top and then tendrils on the bottom. We know who made this mosaic because it says so on the top above the men. You can see in white, and it says Gnosi Epoiase, which is Greek for Gnosis made this. And once again, we see these two men just about to kill this poor deer here. And with the dog helping the attack, the dog is actually bitten into the belly of the deer, and blood is coming out. The man on the right holds the stag by its antlers. One would think that with antlers so pronounced, this would be a buck in his prime, and probably be a bit larger than is shown here. But in any case, these men with red hair and cape flowing back about to attack, and the motion from the right to the animal is reinforced not only by the cape as we saw before, but also notice his patella has flown off his head. So he's just jumped forward. On the left, we see this guy about to swing a double axe at the animal. This is sort of curious. I don't know who would hunt with a double axe, let alone, quite frankly, with their swords. I mean, I would hunt with spears or bows and arrows. But in any case, it shows the action of these men about to slaughter this animal, who is stumbling from his horn being grasped and the dog attacking. And you can see his back legs splaying out and his red tongue sticking out. And its last gasp life before it's about to be slaughtered. We see the ground line being used to give us nice depth there. We can see both the dog's back right leg and the stag's back left leg going over the top of the ground line and towards us, it looks. And that helps give the whole image depth, along with the shadowings of the torso, etc., or the shading of the torso, I should say. Now, another interesting mosaic, pebble mosaic, is this of Dionysus. And we've seen Dionysus before. We will come to talk about him in other art later on. He's a famous subject of art. Now, I show him to you here on a lion because I'm about to return to India, and Dionysus was famous for what was supposed to be from India, introduced from the East. Remember, he's the god of wine and revelry and of orgiastic behavior. He was said to have brought a lion in from the East. And here we see, not exactly a lion, I don't know what we'd call it, a leopard or whatever, but in any case, it gets the idea across. The head's sort of curiously done. He carries a thyrsus, which we've seen before. This is a stick with a pine cone on the top and a ribbon flowing off it. This is the accoutrement of people who participate in the festivals of Dionysus, primarily women, and they would carry these sticks. He sits nude on this animal with only anklets, or I think just one anklet, around his right leg. His legs go off to the right-hand side to the backwards of the animal and then cross at the shins. But he leans forward on the animal with his arm around its neck. And we have what's called a sitting contrapposto here. So we've seen the normal contrapposto. I believe I showed you the walking contrapposto and the doryphorus. If not, I will show that again in any case. Here we have the seated one. And the motion of the animal going leftwards is accentuated by the ribbons flowing out. Now, I do want to point out that he's nude and that he is beardless and indeed hairless. And Dionysus, in addition to being this party god, was also a gender bender god. Here's another depiction from a different period. You don't have to know this one. But here he is seated, getting somebody pouring him some wine because he's a god of wine. We can see underneath his seat the lion that had brought him in from the east. In his left hand, he holds his thyrsus. But if it's worked down from the top to the middle and bottom of this relief sculpture, if you were just to look at the face, you would think, perhaps this is a woman, right? It's beardless. But then as you work your way down the body, you see that he's breastless and his cape falls off to show his genitalia to reveal that he is a man. But this is an example of other sculptures that show Dionysus with both qualities. And indeed, there's one play that concerns Dionysus, and he gets ridiculed by a king for having, for not being very manly, let's put it that way, and not having tough hands and not having a tan because he doesn't work outside, etc. But in any case, we get this image of Dionysus in this pebble mosaic in Macedonia around the time that it had indeed gone into India. And back to the campaign, we see this little map of Bactria. This is Bactria was ancient Afghanistan. We see the Hindu Kush mountains there. There's the Alexandria Escata, the most distant Alexandria, on the very top there. But in the center, we see a place called Ai-Khanoum, and that is also a city dated to this time. I want to point out the city of Gandhara on the lower right for reasons that will become apparent in a moment. On the bottom center, you'll see Kabul, which is the modern capital of Afghanistan. At Ai-Khanoum, along the Oxus River, Alexander would build a site. Here are some shots of it. The French dug this for a while. It's dug as far as I know much at all. In fact, it's been looted, which I'll show you in a moment. But it was a major Greek city built in this distant eastern area. Yeah, here's another shot of it on the left, and on the right, you can see the many looter holes. So when Afghanistan has no government, these people go in and pilfer these things, and any nice pieces of artwork they sell on the antiquities market. America is not a part of the UNESCO or UN antiquities laws. It doesn't adhere to them. It has not signed. It's not a signature of them, which means museums in America can buy artwork on the illegal antiquities market. Artwork that can no longer be sold in most parts of the world. Museums can buy here, and this has caused museums a lot of trouble. By the way, the Met, for example, has purchased a lot of stuff from the antiquities market that's turned out to be forgeries. In any case, and we can see here some column drums, very typical of the Greco-Roman styles at the time. Here's another terrible shot of all the looters' holes. Look at them by the thousands. This site has been torn to bits. But here we see an interesting Ionic/Corinthian column on the left, very Greco-Roman. Some antefixes, very Greek style. Indeed, we find coins there that have stylistically Greek imagery on them. If you notice on the left, and the right, how there's that's the outside of the coin, beyond the little circles there that make the edge of the coin, it has been sort of chewed away. And that's exactly, pretty much what happened. What people would do in antiquity was they'd break off little parts of the coin, because the coin was in fact made out of gold or silver. It was made out of a good material. So they end up like this. Now, the important part of this is it introduced the idea of syncretism, and that is to say, the idea of mixing cultures iconographically. I mean, it can be religiously or what have you, but syncretism means this mixing of two different cultures. You might be familiar with this, for example, with the depictions of the Virgin Mary, who is depicted one way in Italy and another way in Mexico and another way in other cultures. They agree on the idea of Catholicism, but they represent things differently depending on their culture. And we can see that here. And it's with the Buddhas on the left. Here we see a traditional seated Buddha on the right. But on the left are two examples that have somewhat of a Greek feel to it, wearing Greek tunics. And this has become quite famous in the art world. It's called the Gandharan School. And up in Afghanistan and northwest India, this style of artwork of mixing Indian and Greek styles emerges. And so this gives you an idea of the extent to which Alexander had an influence on the world, and in many ways still does, especially in his spread of Greek learning, um, of empirical inquiries, uh, which is what brought the name of this age, gave it its name. Hellenism. Hellas means Greece, and this is sort of the selling of Greece throughout the world. And as we will see, that will have a great impact on the Romans. Okay.